South Korean President Moon Jae-in made crystal clear that the United States and South Korea share a common goal, one that's very important and urgent, denuclearizing North Korea. As we near the first South Korea-U.S. summit between President Donald Trump and President Moon Jae-in, many around the world have their eyes fixed on Washington, D.C. That's where the summit takes place. Will the two leaders get along? Will they hit it off? Will they discuss certain issues and intentionally avoid others? A forecast of the South Korea-U.S. summit this week on Peninsula 24 today. And joining me in the studio is, to my left, Dr. Kim Hyun-wook, professor at the Korean National Diplomatic Academy. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
And as always, Dr. Kim Chang-su, he is with us today. Thank you for coming again this week. Good to see you again. So the South Korea-U.S. summit, it's significant on various levels, I think, for both countries. It's a summit, and the very first of its kind between these two leaders, Presidents Moon and President Trump. It's a meeting of the highest level between the two fairly new administrations. Now, they are strong allies, and so it's a very important meeting, I'm sure, for both countries. In fact, for Mr. Moon, it comes just over 51 days into presidency. What are we reading into the timing of this? How would you assess the timing of the summit?
This signifies that the current security and foreign policy issues around the Korean Peninsula is very much pressing. I think we have had impeachment of former President Park Geun-hye. And ever since then, we had a lot of issues in foreign policies, but it was not really addressed very well by the transition government. So, for example, North Korea was testing nuclear weapons and long-range missiles. Also, there is a worsening relationship between Japan and Korea about the comfort women issues. That issue is also very important, and along with the Chinese sanctions about that issues against South Korea. So all these issues were very important and kind of piled up. We need to quickly solve all these, address all these issues. So I think that's why President Moon is meeting President Trump in 51 days very quickly and very early time period.
Even, one can say this is just 51 days after the inauguration of the Moon Jae-in government in Seoul. You might call it a very relative period of short time for preparation, but I think depending on how you define the preparations, because I believe there is no enough time for any preparation for any big events. So we are rushing to the last minutes, and probably because we have all kind of situations and kind of some troubling problems between the two governments already. So I think it is going to combine us to come to a very quick kind of discussion and even kind of conclusion why we have to meet each other and impending on this kind of very increasing North Korean threats. But we are still living in a kind of war, Korean War. The war has not ended officially. We're in an armistice agreement, armistice period, we call. So there's a lot of things in common that we have to deal with. We, meaning the two presidents, should take into account when they first met in Washington, D.C. So given a kind of short period of time, yes, but I think the progress comes at the 11th hour, so we can make a big kind of accomplish out of it.
What do you think drove this summit to happen? I'm sure the two countries both had some kind of a need to rush the summit, if I may say that, rush the summit so quickly. Do you think there was a need by both administrations, not only South Korea, but U.S. as well?
But given the official schedules, itinerary for President Trump, because he has to meet a lot of world dignitaries and he has a full packed schedule ready for this year. So I think this is the earliest possible opening for Mr. Trump and also for President Moon. So I think it's very timely and we can come up with a very up-to-date information and knowing to each other face to face and getting better understanding of what you are. Because given all the briefings and all the suspicions about what he did in the past, what he said during his presidency campaigns on both sides, so I think this is a better opportunity for the two leaders to get together and facing each other face to face and talk very honestly what's the problem, what is a kind of conflicting problem between us, if there is any, And what should the remedy for this kind of problem? Because after all, we are based on a very strong, robust, blood-forged alliance for the last almost 70 years. So this is a very timely, and I think this, we have been doing all kind of preparations at both levels for a successful summit meeting at the late of this month.
Yeah, I also agree with Dr. Kim that there is a need for both sides to have the summit meeting. I think in the United States there are some concerns about the repetition of what happened between George Bush and progressive governments in Korea like Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun. At that time, the two countries' alliance relationship was not very good. So there were some concerns about these kinds of worsened relationship to be reiterated again. So I think we need to, meet each other, two presidents having summit meeting and get along with each other, kind of, get rid of all the misperceptions that is, arising in the Washington, D.C. area. Also, we have some issues and agenda that needs to be solving together. Trump government's policy towards Asia and Korean Peninsula of South Korea is a very important partner to talk with and to get along with. So I think some of the important issues like how to treat North Korea and how to treat their deployment issues, they are the ones the United States and South Korea wants to meet each other and ascertain what the other partners' intentions are about.
Right. Those are some points that I would really like to get into later on in the broadcast. But on a lighter note, I mean, U.S. President Trump's spontaneous nature has caught a number of heads of state off guard. And of course, the media raves about it. The media loves that. For instance, Mr. Trump's notorious handshake with French President Macron, that was pretty famous, and his behavior at a NATO meeting in Brussels. So full of unexpectancies going on, but how do we really forecast that the first intro of these two leaders to play out?
Oh, they're very difficult because we are kind of victims of the past memory. Because we're always talking about the media and the pundit talking about how they handshake, for example, what kind of terminals they use. I think this has some important can make a reference to what would happen in the next, but it has tremendous limits to it. So we have to be much more open-minded, more rational enough to, okay, this should be the behavior from these two, summits, and they're going to do this, rather than just, oh, this is another just repetition of what they did with the French presidents and with the Japanese president. So this kind of, sometimes comparisons are ostentatious, as they say. So we don't have to make kind of comparison with any other summit meetings with other countries. This is a Korea-U.S. specific summit meeting, and we have a lot of problems in common. That is North Korean threats, North Korean problems. And again, South Korea is still in a war state. So how we are going to finally, eventually, put an end to this long-held Korean War, that's the most binding force for our two allies and for the two summits.
Now, some Korean watchers are worried. They say they're worried that the two leaders won't hit it off because, as the top office said, this would be a great intro, basically the beginning of a long friendship, at least 5 years. But the two men come from very different histories. They have two very contrasting styles, perhaps divergent conceptions on the South Korea's and U.S.'s role on the Korean Peninsula. And then came the Otto Warmbier's death. So do you think that, what do you think are some factors that may hinder the smooth discussions or connection between the two leaders?
Well, I think, as you have mentioned, the Warmbier incident is very important, thing to have an influence on the summit meeting, because it was well known that the President Moon wants to develop North-South Korea relations and exchanges, which would be a very firm basis for the future unification of the Korean Peninsula. But the U.S., not only President Trump, but historically most of presidents of the United States, policy priority on the Korean Peninsula is denuclearization of North Korea. They mention and they say that they are interested and they support the peaceful unification, but I don't think the unification issue is priority for them. So I think in that sense that there is some mismatch between South Korea and the United States strategic goal in the Korean Peninsula. And what happened is Won-byul's death, which made the U.S. atmosphere and attitude towards North Korea to be very hawkish recently. And some concerns arise that this incident would make the summit to be a little bit troublesome, kind of President Trump to be more hawkish towards North Korea, President Moon still leaning towards exchanges and dialogue with North. But I think this concern is not something we have to be worrying so much of, because basically the South Korea and the United States North Korea policy is in the same direction. They all focus on the sanctions and dialogue and pressure and engagement. But which side is more important depends upon the circumstances and time period of that time. I mean, now after the Won-byul's death, now is the time to put more pressure on North Korea, put more sanctions on North Korea rather than engaging with North Korea. So I think President Moon would be very flexible about this and have more leeway to get along with the United States policy towards North Korea.
Now, obviously, we all know that North Korea's nuclear program will take center stage between the two leaders. Now, do you think the two leaders will be able to achieve a common goal to successfully address North Korea? Do you think they'll be able to at least lay the groundwork for the stability of the Korean Peninsula at this summit?
Yeah, I think, as I have mentioned, that they have more common grounds than differences in their policy towards North Korea. Maximum pressure and engagement for the President Trump side, and President Moon's side is sanctions and dialogue. So I think they can get along with each other. The only thing that they need to go further for an extra agreement is first, that's precondition for a dialogue. It's not sure what is the precondition for President Trump for a dialogue with North Korea. Of course, this is not a right time for a dialogue after Won-byul's death, but if there will be any possibilities, they need to clarify the precondition for a dialogue with North Korea. President Moon already mentioned that the moratorium of provocations by North Korea is the minimal precondition for a dialogue. And now, what is the U.S. precondition? That's the first one I think we need to talk about. And second one is, what is the roadmap for two countries to denuclearize North Korea? South Korean roadmap is to freeze the nuclear and missile programs first, and then leads to the denuclearization. This two-stage roadmap. But what is President Trump's roadmap, specific roadmap for denuclearization? All these are specific things that I think they will talk further. But I think in the joint statement, they will just come up with a very principled and broad agreement, I think, about the North Korea issues.
I think the two presidents will talk about the commonalities. There's a Korean War, how we're going to address North Korean threats, both the nuclear and missiles. And I think kind of common agreements, common, kind of sense about how we're going to deal with North Korean threat is already there. But always the devil is in the details. Because Professor Kim mentioned about this two type of stage of dealing with North Korean threats. But this is not the first time, because we have talked about this kind of two-step, gradual approach to dealing with North Korean threats for the last 20 years. Nothing's new. So I think we're going to share, the two presidents will share this kind of commonality, and they're going to address how we can more effectively deal with North Korean threats. Because the big difference between this one, upcoming one, and the previous summit's meeting is the United States is really concerned about the upcoming North Korean threats, ICBMs. So this is a big difference. So how are we going to deal with these ICBM more imminent threats rather than long-term threats? How are we going to denuclearize the North Korean threat? This is something we can ponder later on, but how we are going to deal with more immediate future issue. That is something they can do at this summit.
Also, I want to talk about President Moon's speech at the World Taekwondo Championship. So there, he sent a message of reconciliation between South and North Korea through sports. He even slightly floated the idea of a joint team between South and North Korea, so them fielding a joint team at the Olympics. He invited the North Koreans to the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. How would that message resonate within the United States and President Trump?
I think, President Moon already made it clear that before the denuclearization process begins, South Korea still would initiate any possible exchanges with North as far as that's non-governmental, non-political, and humanitarian issue related. So I think as far as what President Moon has mentioned, this kind of sports exchange is something that can be initiated even before the denuclearization process of North Korea begins. So I don't think that would be any problems even in Washington, D.C. The problem, though, is that, the North Korea IOC committee member, I forgot his name. Chang-su. He rejected the proposal by the President Moon. Right. He said the political issues should be solved before we begin the sports exchanges between North and South Korea. So I think, I'm kind of thinking two ways. First, they're worrying about the, concerns by North Korea is still there about the, sanctions by international communities. So they hope that South Korea would remove all the sanctions by which they can, remove all the sanctions by international community, which is very important aspect for the North Korean benefits now. And second issue, I think, is that, Kim Jong-un, I don't think he's the same person as Kim Jong-il. I think he would prefer his power consolidation more than one national identity or North-South Korea exchanges. So I think as far as his priority is to consolidate his power by nuclear weapons, I don't think his dialogue partner would be the United States rather than South Korea. I think he wants to talk with the United States first, by which he can get a lot of economic incentives for his power consolidation rather than just going out there to talk with South Korea for very minimal incentive from his perspective.
Because many South Korean media came up with a kind of question why President Moon made that kind of specific remarks at a meeting with the North Korean athletes. Because I think it was a gesture of we are ready to open to to talking with you, because we are looking for a kind of breakout of this kind of long stagnant relation between North and South Korea. But in that sense, it's good. But again, as Professor Kim mentioned, they rejected on the site, and that there's all kinds of conditions why this kind of proposal cannot be met, given all kind of practicalities between North and South Korea. So anyway, that what will be written and remain will be kind of the proposal that he made. So President Moon made this such and such, recommended to North Korea, and North Korea couldn't accept it. So this is kind of political significant message that we are trying to convey to the United States and to North Korea. So we are, even though we are really worried about North Korean nuclear and missile threats, we are also concerned about leaving kind of room for this kind of dialogue and anyway achievements or reconciliation between North Korea, which one cannot reject, because after all, it is good for not only for South Korea, for the United States as well. Okay.
Also, not only is North Korea on the at the top stage, but there are also very sensitive topics such as the deployment of THAAD, FTA, that could be at the negotiations table between the two leaders. Of course, South Korea's presidential office has said repeatedly that those are not the official agenda, and the focus of this summit will be a good intro of the two leaders and perhaps laying the groundwork for a good friendship. However, we can't rule out the possibility that Mr. Trump could just bring up the issue of THAAD deployment, for instance, of FTA, for instance. What are your thoughts on that, and how should the South Korean president respond to this?
I think South Korean president already, clarified that there is no intention for South Korea to withdraw and reverse the deployment of THAAD by focusing on the domestic procedures. So I think the domestic procedures, the purpose of it, as Foreign Minister Kang mentioned, is to gather more support from the Korean people for the deployment of THAAD, rather than not to reverse the THAAD deployment. So I think President Moon will try to deliver this message clearly to President Trump, and a very clear message to President Trump that there will be the deployment of THAAD, even though there will be some time lag. important thing is to remove the misperception that the U.S. have about the deployment issues. So I think they'll be settled okay. I mean, this is not a big deal.
So what are some observation points from the viewer's point of view? How would we assess the success or not of this summit? What are some of the observation points that we should be on the lookout for?
This is first summit by President Moon and President Trump. There should be nothing but success. They will try to make it successful. If there will be any differences, they will not reveal it. They will just make it a very confidential. And in the joint statement and press conference, they will just make it that they have agreed upon every issue. So I think after this summit meeting, the U.S.-South Korea alliance will show more consolidarity and more coherence. I think this is the purpose of summit meeting.
What is that very point that we should be on the lookout for, Professor Kim?
I don't know. I hope that they can shake hands for at least 20 seconds. 1 second more than Prime Minister Abe did with President Trump.
Okay, we'll have our stopwatches and start counting. Definitely on site. I will be.
Okay.
And yourself?
I don't know how long they were going to shake hands. That's just one indicator how close they are to each other. But again, many kind of episodic talks they talk to each other about the Mr. Moon's family episode and how the United States was helping hand to the South Koreans, how we still appreciate the U.S. contribution to our peace and prosperity on the peninsula. This is something that still can resonate to this day. If President Moon is successful in bringing these terms, how we feel grateful toward the U.S. contribution and how we have to keep our very robust alliance for the many years to come. This is has a tremendous combining power between the two countries. If they get on that kind of trend on this direction, it will be a success. So this is a very good time in putting all kinds of agenda on the table at the summit. So on this extended terms by the United States and how we to deal with those kind of threats. So these are the options. I think this is the agreement we can come up with. So I think we can this kind of Foreign Minister Kang mentioned yesterday in his remarks that this kind of institutionalization, for example, like EDS-SCG, is a good start. And also kind of regularization, a 2+2 meeting between the two countries after this summit meeting. So if they agree on this kind of future steps, it will be a success.
Well, but based on my history with Professor Kim, I'm going to be there with a stopwatch and counting the seconds of their handshake. I want to close out this session with maybe a closing remarks or perhaps an advice to the Moon administration traveling to the U.S. for the summit, if you have a one-point advice to them.
I think for some person like President Trump, it's very important to have a very close personal ties with him. I mean, he's a businessman. I think he's handled by himself, not institutions, but by his personality. So I think his personality and his characteristics is very important factor to move himself, to make his behavior determine in some directions. So I think in that point, I think it's very important for President Moon to have very close personal ties with President Trump. I think that will be one important goal of this summit, I think.
And if you have a one-point advice?
I like the President Moon to make this point. We are allies. We have fought together on the peninsula and elsewhere in the world. And we have engaged on PKOs and multinational forces. So we share the same values of freedom. And so my point is, stick to a principled realism rooted in our values and shared interests of the Iraq-U.S. alliance and common sense. Common sense is very important. So if anything goes against common sense, just stop it and think it over. So I think this is my advice, personal advice to my president and both to the President Trump, that we are really important allies in the world. And that's the first step on which we can develop our more serious and more closer ties between the two allies.
So definitely we're all looking forward to this because it's unconventional in various ways, coming at this kind of a setting in where geopolitical tensions are rising on the Korean Peninsula, as well as U.S.-North Korea ties. I think perhaps maybe President Moon could end or even begin his talks with Mr. Trump saying, hey, Donald, how are we going to team up and tame that Kim Jong-un, that younger leader in North Korea? Perhaps that will work.
That'll work.
Hope that works.
Yeah, that'll work.
All right, well, thank you so much to you both for this very interesting discussions today. And I look forward to speaking with you again after the summit and assess how the summit went.
Great.
That would be great. And I would also like to thank you all for watching. And I will be back next week after the South Korea-U.S. summit and after President Moon Jae-in's first foreign trip, which is to the United States.